Good morning, my Lincoln family. Thanks for everyone's support on the channel. I'm moving my 65 red car this morning, and I wanted to do this quick video, something I've been wanting to do. Oftentimes we talk about in 64, 65, the dash is literally the same, right, for the most part. The amp gauge, we always talk about how important it is for this to be rebuilt over the course of time with power going through it and just aging of the wires and heat, cool, whatever, the climate, the temperature of, inside the car, the wire, all of that stuff. This gauge will is prone to go bad. And there was even a bulletin back in the 60s, I think it was, that the dealership would go in and they would put some sort of I think it was like a rubberized kind of little piece across the back of it. It's kind of hard to explain right now. Maybe I'll dump in another video, I'll dump some photos in and I'll talk more in depth about it. But you see how it's kind of jumping? A lot of people say, well, hey, my gauge jumps a little bit. My understanding is that's generally an indication that, the gauge really needs to be rebuilt. If you know these cars, you know that they have an IVR, and that controls the voltage to, I think it's the fuel and oil, if I remember correctly. And that will keep those gauges from bouncing even when you go around turns. Like if the fuel is sloshing, it controls on, it kind of pulsates to these gauges, and it makes sure that those gauges don't go up and down as you go around turns. And that was just something that Ford was doing, my understanding. But this one you can see is the odd man out, and there's three options. You can have it rebuilt like Blair Farmer does those here in Tampa. You basically have to take your dash apart to get that out. It is a little bit of a pain if you don't, normally kind of get into that kind of stuff. Number two, you can bypass it, which is about the same amount of effort. And then what happens is you solder and you bypass this gauge and you solder those two wires together. I did that on my 64 with the help of my friend. He came by, he's really good at soldering. It's a pretty big wire. You solder it together, and then that gauge just will be straight down the middle and it won't function anymore. Okay, I'll explain another alternative to that in a second. Or you can go with the Dakota digital gauges, not everyone's favorites, but it replaces the speedometer and then your 4 pods. And it does require nothing visually other than the gauge being different. It's kind of a white face gauge or black, but you do have to take the dash apart, and you have to trim a little bit on the back side because of the depth of those gauges. So it's a little bit involved. They have instructions on their website if you ever think about that. But then you would literally replace these 4 gauges in your speedometer, and you would have a modern type gauge. A lot of guys do that. Okay, so that's your 3 options. You can bypass, you can fix and rebuild with Blair or someone else, or you can do the Dakota digital. Okay, one thing that Robert did in this car that I was going to do also in my 64, but I haven't done it yet, is you go over here to the ashtray and you put a little voltmeter. That easy. Okay, this is something that you can do. You'll see it kind of on newer cars, like newer stereo type guys. They've been doing this for a long time. You can even do battery terminals where it has that built into it. But I love this option because if I do decide to bypass this, then I can just pop that open. I don't even have to open it all the way. I can just go like this, boom, 14, good to go, right? So I wanted to show you guys that. I haven't been driving this car that much because I really need to get this done. And if you look, I'll put a link in the description at some point. Pat Tian, he has a nice write-up in the Lincoln forum, and he kind of talks about how he upgraded his. There is kind of a 3.5/4 option. You can upgrade this amp gauge to a volt gauge, but it does involve some modification. You have to take this one out, and he took basically a newer style gauge from a boat with the same almost color needle, and he replaced the guts of it. And when you look at Pat's, you wouldn't even be able to tell that it's been updated. But of course, it's reading the volts, and it's not an amp gauge anymore. But that's a little bit probably down the beaten path that most people wouldn't take. So if you decide that you want to either leave it and fix it, you could also add the item over here, or you can bypass it and you would have your voltmeter over there. So a couple of options for you. The thing you don't want to do, and again, I know I've driven this car a little bit, you could argue and say, hey, I'm going to drive it like this, I'll be fine. I've had people say that, and you could get away with it for a while. I was driving Tony Boss Boland's 65 Lincoln Continental in October 2017. I was taking it home, which was going to be about a 45-minute ride. Then we were going to go to a car show the next day, and literally all of the power in the car dies because all of the power on the inside comes through that connection, okay? It's also been known to start fires depending on how bad it is back there. It could be catastrophic. It could be, okay? Pat has warned people. He's like, look, you know, when you got all your stuff on in here, your lights and everything going, you know, there's a lot of power coming through that. So for me, I'm gonna bypass it or have Blair rebuild it depending on how bad it is in the very near future, and that's gonna involve me taking apart the dash, which I've done. It's not too horribly bad, but you know, it's gonna take a few hours to do it and get it done. Gotta get it done. All right, everyone, have a great day. ODB, the Lincoln Addict, we out of here.